murdered by a hitman. And then, as we know, the defendant later uses TV as code when she's speaking on those wiretap calls. 8:20 a.m., Wendy texts Charlie, "This is so sweet." We don't know what it means, but she's texted him that, and then she deleted it. Sometime between the time it was sent, 8:20 a.m., and the time that her phone was cell-brighted or downloaded at the police station later that day. 9:04 a.m., Dan Markel leaves a voicemail for Wendy, telling her he's headed to the gym and wants to know if it's okay for him to pick up the boys early and take them swimming that afternoon. Wendy says no, he cannot take the boys swimming after school that day. Meanwhile, what's going on across town? The Prius is following Dan Markel into the gym parking lot. There it is at 9:16 a.m. 9:19 a.m. to 9:37 a.m., Charlie and Wendy talk for 18 minutes. Wendy and Dan argue back and forth a bit about him wanting to take the boys swimming, but after getting off the phone with Charlie, Wendy concedes the argument with Dan and says, "Okay, you can pick them up and bring them back to me when you're done swimming." But of course, the swimming plan didn't happen because Dan Markel was killed. 10:38 a.m., the Prius follows Mr. Markel out of the gym parking lot. 10:45 a.m., Mr. Markel is shot twice in the head, in his vehicle, in his garage. 10:51, the Prius is captured, fleeing the scene on a city bus camera. 11:01, Mr. Geiger calls 911. 11:15, law enforcement arrives at the scene and sets up a perimeter. Dan Markel is rushed to the hospital. He's treated, but the damage is catastrophic. It's not survivable. And he passes away about 14 hours later. 12:30, the hitmen, now headed back south, turn their phones on. They had turned them off for the homicide. They turn them back on. The first phone call that either one of them makes is Sigfredo Garcia to Catherine Magbanowa. They want their money. Where is Magbanowa getting the money? From Charlie. 12:45. So while the killers are calling Magbanowa and heading south, Wendy goes out of her way to visit the crime scene, encounters a roadblock and crime scene tape. Per the officer at the roadblock, she would have been able to clearly see the police activity at her former residence. The residence where her children currently lived half the time and where they woke up that morning. Yet she abruptly turns around and leaves. She does not make contact with the officer to ask what's going on. She does not call the police to inquire. She does not call Dan Markel to say, "Are you okay? There's a bunch of cops at the house." She does not call the daycare to make sure her children arrive that morning and are okay. Instead, she proceeds to the ABC Liquors, purchases her Bullet Bourbon at 12:49. She's later approached by law enforcement at lunch and gives a law enforcement interview in which she says, "My parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else." This echoes Rob Adelson's testimony that his mother hated Dan Markel at the time of his murder. And even from the periphery, it was known to Ryan Fitzpatrick as Charlie's friend that his mother did not like Dan Markel. In her law enforcement interview, Wendy suggests her mother is someone who is very angry at Dan Markel. She suggests Charlie when asked if someone might do this on her behalf. She calls her mom, and the defense has put that call into evidence. 7:04 p.m., she tells her mom that there's been a shooting, and afterwards, Wendy expresses relief that they sounded surprised. 8:59, defendant arrives at Charlie's with the murder money. How do we know she went there and that they aren't just old people that drive really slow? Well, There's a text message outside your house. I guess we're going to find out what that means, but I guess it's not going to be outside your house. And he says 10 men. Guess we're going to find out what that means, but apparently it doesn't mean I'll be there in 10 minutes and meet you there and get the money. About 10 o'clock, Catherine Magbanua joins Charlie at the house. Here they are making plans for that meeting. Next slide, please. Charlie answers the door with a gun in his hand. He's extremely amped up. He tells Magbanua, my parents just left. They both end up taking Xanax and sleeping over there for the night. The next morning, July 19th, 2014. So this is early morning hours, 1:25 a.m. I think we need the next slide. Yeah, 1:25 a.m. Donna and Harvey arrive at their Orlando hotel. In the morning, Charlie puts the money in Catherine Magbanua's trunk. She's seen at 9:33 a.m. approximately, heading south toward Rivera's house, where she's going to meet up ultimately with Rivera and Garcia and give them the money. Garcia takes the money out of the trunk where Charlie Adelson put it and divides it up between the three of them. Magbanua says she did not count her cut, but we know she put some of it in the bank, creating the largest monthly cash spike of any of the records we examined for her bank. This cash spike also occurs at a time when Magbanua was not employed. Rivera says his understanding was the job paid $100,000 total to be split between the three, and that the cut that he received was roughly a third of that at $35,000. We don't know the amount of Garcia's cut, but we know he got at least enough to buy a car and a motorcycle. All right, so July 20th, the defendant and Harvey Adelson take Wendy and the boys back to South Florida. 2 days after, not even 48 hours after Dan Markel is shot. They're gone. Relocation granted. On the way, Wendy receives a call from Detective Isom. She tells him the call's breaking up, and she hangs up, afterwards referring him to her lawyer. Catherine Magbanua that day, or thereabouts, opens her Ziploc bag of money and finds her cut to be $100 bills stapled together in $1,000 stacks. How we know Charlie keeps his money. She also notes that her cut is damp and moldy. She mentions this to Charlie, and he tells her that his mother washed the money. Not like laundered, like washed. Rob Adelson gets a call from Donna Adelson advising him not to talk to the FBI. What? Rob Adelson gets a call from this defendant advising him not to talk to the FBI, just in case they call. He says, well, I already did. She says, well, you don't know anything anyway, and hangs up. July 24th, 2014, Dan Markel was laid to rest in Canada. His children were not in attendance. August of 2014, the defendant registers the older child for flag football under the last name Adelson. His name is Markel. This is 1 month after their father was killed, and already he's being erased from their lives. Within 1 year, their names would be legally changed to Adelson. (9/12/14). The defendant refers to the younger child by the last name Adelson. 9/17/14. The first check is written to Catherine Magbanua, signed by this defendant. This is the murder money. Even though Charlie has signing authority on this account, he could write these checks. He chooses to connect his elderly mother to a murder payment. If she wasn't involved, there is no reason in the world why she would write these checks. The defense said in opening that Charlie told Donna to write the checks because it was his business. But half of these checks were written after the business was sold back to Harvey on October 2nd, 2015. Regardless of who owned the business.
Well, members of the jury, you are relying on your memory of the evidence in this case. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. And regardless of who owned the business at the time, all the Adelsons had an interest in the Adelson Institute. All three of them had signing authority on that checkbook. But the defendant is the one that wrote that check. September 17, 2014, and the 43 checks that followed. Is that consistent with what we've heard? That she would just write the checks and not ask any questions? We've heard that she is assertive, she's controlling, she's a details person. She ran that business and those people's lives. She ran a tight ship. We've seen her weekly planners where she plans out every detail of her own life, making meticulous notes. She kept detailed information about Dan Markell and lots of other things. Rob Adelson testified that she's not the type of person who's just going to do something someone tells her to do. She's going to be asking questions. And we heard that Charlie testified that he told his mother about extortion. He says he was being extorted, right? All right, let's fast forward to October of 2015. Charlie's had a couple girlfriends since the murder and is now dating June Mchinda. Remember her? June, one of Charlie's girlfriends that testified, she said they were enjoying a fairy tale relationship in October of 15. During her relationship with Charlie, June observes that Charlie packages his money in an unusual way. $100 bills stapled into $1,000 stacks. June also observes the defendant to be in control of the family and super involved with the grandchildren. However, she found it odd that nobody in the family seemed curious about who killed Dan Markell, nor did they seem upset about the murder. Rob Adelson also noted a complete lack of curiosity on the part of his mother about this murder in the family. When he asked what the defendant thought happened to Danny, she said, quote, "I don't know and I don't care. It doesn't concern me." As someone who liked details and who always stayed on top of everything, her total lack of interest in who killed her former son-in-law, her grandchildren's father, is totally out of character. From July of 14 to April of 16, Donna Adelson got everything she wanted. Wendy and the kids were in South Florida where she could drop them off and pick them up, manage their schoolwork, their tennis, their piano lessons, and have her sunshines with her every day. All the while, she's steady paying for the murder of their father. Everyone is living their best life, thinking they've gotten away with murder until the bump. Everything changed on April 19th, 2016, when the bump occurred. The undercover approaches Donna and hands her a piece of paper. The most human reaction in the world is to look at the paper. Uh-oh. I think we got one more. There we go. The defense told you in opening that this defendant is a normal person just like you and me. There is nothing normal about the way she conducts herself in the minutes, hours, and days after the undercover approaches her with that paper. The bump and the wire were designed to expose the co-conspirators and their roles in this conspiracy, and it did. Here, we're just 10 minutes later. There's only one thing a normal person would do if approached on the street by a stranger who appears to be threatening harm to them in some way. A normal, or maybe I should say an innocent person would, 1, look at the paper. She didn't do that. 2, get to safety. Get help, contact law enforcement or your husband or somebody that's going to come help you. Get somewhere safe. What you would not do is lead the bad guy right to the grandchildren. The last thing a normal, innocent person would do is go get her little grandchildren and walk right back down the same block with them where this stranger just approached her. But that is exactly what she does. Then she gets on the phone with Charlie and says absolutely nothing about Dan Markell. It's pictures on the paper. What she does say on the wire, which by the way is direct evidence, I know y'all like that, some direct evidence. When Charlie asked Donna on State's 99 call A, does it involve me or other people? Well, probably both of us. That is direct evidence. If anyone in that jury room wants to acquit her, make them tell you how that is not a confession. In call B, Charlie calls back because he can't stand it. And he asks his mother, will you send me a picture of the bump flyer?
Yeah, let me do this. Do you want to take a picture of the letter and send me the salt ticket?
No, I don't want to do that. Well, why not? Why not? Normal, nice little old lady who knows nothing about this murder and has nothing to do with it. If Charlie's the one making you write the checks and Charlie's the one that knows something about it, send him a picture of it. He's asking for it. She doesn't want to do that. Why not? Call C, Charlie calls back to say, don't talk about things in the apartment. Oh, obviously. Obviously, we can't talk about things in the apartment. What's obvious? Is it obvious to you?
What is the kind of that when they ask for? TV is probably that fine.
This TV was probably about 5. She's the original code talker. This TV, and look what he says. Well, they asked you for $5,000. He decodes it. He's not the one talking in code. He's decoding it and saying what he's picking up what she's putting down. There's no TV mentioned by the undercover operative that approached Donna Adelson on the street. Couple big takeaways for you, please. Innocent people do not talk in code. Second big takeaway, TV is code for the murder throughout this case. You got Charlie's joke, Wendy's chilling statement to Jeff Lacasse, the alibi of the TV, and now here we've got this TV again. A TV that's the alibi for Wendy. It sat broken for over a month so that a repairman could come out to be her alibi on the morning of the murder. An appointment that her parents set up for her, which was pointless because the TV was smashed and of course could not be repaired. Then she claimed she had an 18-minute phone call with Charlie about the fact that a smashed TV can't be fixed before she got in her car and went to the crime scene, where she did not get out of her car or make any phone calls or make any inquiries about what was going on at the house where her kids lived. Then Donna says that the undercover mentioned an ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
whereby, without knowing which ex-girlfriend, Charlie calls not his most recent ex-girlfriend, not the one before that. He only calls one, Catherine Magbanua, because that's the only one he did a murder with. Because he probably did have a general idea what his mother was talking about. When Charlie brings up going to the police, his mother says, that's not a good idea. Why not? Then instead of notifying the police, Charlie and the defendant leave the safety of her very secure building and meet at a marina just 300 yards from where she was approached by the undercover. They were observed speaking very intensely to each other in low tones. After that meeting, Charlie goes to Dolce Vita. This is the restaurant where he meets up with Catherine Magbanua, and we are able to capture some of that conversation that was had there. In that recording, we hear Charlie make statements that are not only incriminating, but that also are totally inconsistent with the defense that he would later offer at trial. Pause on the wiretap here for a moment just to go to what his defense was and what we've learned about that defense. I told you earlier that he said that Magbanua, Garcia, and Rivera acted alone. They just came to Tallahassee and killed Dan Markel, kind of in the hopes that they would get paid. There were several pieces of evidence that Charlie had to explain, and he designed a defense that he thought would do that. First, he had to explain that he's got this close connection between his girlfriend and the hitman. So the obvious defense there is, she heard me griping about Markel and she thought she was doing me a favor, so she did it on her own. Well, the problem with that is normally you're not going to have your extortionist spend the night with you. You're not going to have the woman that has murdered your former brother-in-law spend the night with you. You're not going to inquire about her plans to go to the pool the next morning if she's, just murdered your ex-brother-in-law. So to explain these messages, he testified that he did not believe she was a part of it. She wasn't one of the extortionists. I was extorted by the killers. I had nothing to do with it. No one in my family had anything to do with it. But I thought that Magbanua was just a victim of the hitmen too. She was a go-between for them. She was protecting him from them. All the money he and his mom were paying her, cash and checks, were going to the hitmen, not for the benefit of Catherine Magbanua. Even the checks that were being deposited into her bank account, he said he believed she was taking out and giving the money to the killers. It was just funneling through her account so she could get insurance for her kids. So Charlie testified that he had previously mentioned to Magbanua the $1 million offer that his family was going to give Dan Markel, and from that she deduced, he's got a bunch of money. So she ran her mouth to her associates, and her associates took it upon themselves somehow to figure out who Dan Markel is and where he was and kill him on their own. Per Charlie, it was Katie alone that came to him on the night of the murder and demanded money on behalf of the hitmen, with the threat that if he didn't pay, they would kill him or other members of his family. Since he didn't have that much money, Magbanua then negotiated a layaway plan with the hitmen for him to pay her monthly to go toward this amount of money that the hitmen were demanding. He agreed. He opened up his safe, not at gunpoint or anything, and gave her all the money that was in there. And because she needed to show proof of employment to get insurance, that's why that money was funneling through her account. It was all for the extortionists. The problem for Charlie with that was that he had already agreed to put Magbanua on the payroll between the two trips. You see here in June, he hadn't done it yet, but he says, no problem. Okay, so he'd already agreed to do it before she allegedly extorted him. Even though he had signing authority It's this defendant that wrote those 44 checks. So if he's being extorted, why doesn't he write the checks? It's this extortion theory that we're saying that the defendant adopted when she heard Charlie's testimony and texted everyone she knew that what he just said on the witness stand was the truth. There's a concept in the law known as adoptive admissions. That's when one party makes a statement and the statement is adopted as the truth by another person. So when Charlie says in those first couple wire calls, if there's a threat, you go to the police, it's of interest that Donna doesn't say, what do you mean if there's a threat? We've been extorted for 2 years. There's been a threat for 2 years. Charlie did tell his best friend, Ryan Fitzpatrick, about the bump. So what I want to highlight here is the difference between their conduct during this like alleged extortion that was going on for 2 years versus the way they act after the bump, which we know was a ruse, but was supposed to be like a blackmail effort. So Charlie tells Ryan Fitzpatrick about the bump. He also tells him about the confrontation with Garcia in the roadway on July 1st, 2014. But he never previously confided in Ryan Fitzpatrick about, even though it's his best friend, about being extorted for 2 years by this girlfriend of his or her associates. Ryan also noted a major change in Charlie's demeanor around the time of the bump. He was displaying a level of stress and anxiety that was not present before the bump, evidencing that his story about being extorted the whole time is false. June Mchinda noticed these changes in Charlie's behavior as well, but she also noted a major change in this defendant's demeanor after the bump. Although she didn't know about the bump, around this time she observed the defendant to be a mess. She had a swollen face, was crying, and said she was on painkillers for stress. On the balcony of the Icon, which I'm not sure this is the right balcony, but some high rise, the defendant told June Mchinda she felt Danny was haunting her from the grave. Why would she make that statement unless she felt guilty about having wronged Dan Markel? So keeping that all in mind, let's see if the other evidence in the case makes sense with this Charlie version of events that this defendant has adopted. Starting with his statements to Catherine Magbanua at the Dolce Vita restaurant. Charlie says to Catherine Magbanua, if they had evidence, we'd have already gone to the airport. Even if they bug your phone, you're still not talking about any of this. Like his mother, Charlie emphasizes that the co-conspirators should not talk about what they know on the phone. The cops would only bug your phone to get information about the murder, right? I mean, why are we not talking on the phone if we had nothing to do with it? Why are we not talking on the phone if we're being extorted and we're the victims here? Why are we not reporting it to the police if we're being extorted and we're the victims here? If the cops are listening, we're not reporting it to the cops because we're afraid they'll come kill us if we do that. Well, talk about it on the phone. If they're listening, they'll hear and they'll know you're being extorted, but they don't do that because it's bull. Discussion about how he's going to start arming himself. So Charlie says at Dolce Vita, I'm going to start, I don't remember his words exactly, but he's going to start carrying a gun and he's prepared to shoot. And he goes through a scenario where, you know, he might have to kill somebody in his driveway and the cops will not ask any questions because he's a dentist. If he's been an extortion victim for 2 years, why is he just now starting to carry a gun? And then he says, if somebody comes up to me asking for money in my house, he's going to shoot them. This is the same guy that's been like too paralyzed by fear over the last 2 years to report his victimization to the police or to anyone. This is a guy of considerable resources that could, I don't know, get some muscle or some help or some something. Not just roll over and open his safe and give all his money to some girl that's not even armed. This is a tough guy that would never tolerate somebody coming up to him at his house and asking for money. But he's talking to the woman who supposedly did that exact thing, came into his house and asked him for money. He doesn't mention, well, I gave you the money, but I'm not giving this guy any money. You know, it's like they don't mention this extortion. So you see the problem. But This defendant doesn't see the problem. She says that that's the truth. The truth is out. Thank goodness. The truth is out after we remained silent for so long. Defense does not have to prove anything, but through cross-examination and the witnesses they called, they chose to kind of suggest, maybe Charlie was involved, maybe Wendy was involved. But there's no connection to our client. But Charlie's story was that he and his mom were involved in the sense that they were extorted by Catherine McManus, so they knew who did the killing. They just didn't speak up because they were scared, because they were being extorted. Donna Adelson calls Charlie's story the truth when it suits her to support her son and proclaim his innocence during his trial, but now she kind of wants to distance herself from that because it's ridiculous story. It's not the truth. The truth wasn't out. Don't let her distance herself. She adopted that statement as the truth. She's stuck with it.
Please approach. I'll take you to the jury room.
Yeah, leave everything right there on the chair, please.
Everyone can be seated. Ms. Fulford, you may argue what you're seeking to raise.
Thank you, Judge. The comments being made in the closing argument of the state, and I don't like to interrupt closing, so I apologize for that. But there have been several comments that have been made that are burden shifting and commenting on my client's right to remain silent. She's stood before this jury and said that the defense has some other version. She said this in a text, but now they're saying something different. We don't have an obligation to answer any of this. She's insinuating to the jury that we're going to come up there and provide her version of events. She chose not to testify.
Ms. Kappelman, any argument concerning this?
Ms. Adelson has made adoptive admissions and has suggested other alternative theories that have been developed through cross-examination. I'm entitled to comment on those theories.
Concerning this, Ms. Fulford, as I have heard in closing argument and the evidence, my recall of it and my notes as well as to what occurred during the trial, there were adoptive admissions as it relates to statements that occurred during Charlie Adelson's trial. While she has not testified, the prosecutor has not made any direct comment on her not testifying in this trial. Also, as well, it is clear she has no burden to prove anything. The state is entitled to argue reasonable inferences from the evidence in the record. We will take a break at this time. If the defendant needs to use the restroom, bailiffs, please take her. If anyone else needs to, please stretch your legs or use the restroom at this point as well. Ms. Kappelman, on my clock, you have 35 minutes remaining.